I want to begin with a drawing, because everything in this story hangs off of it. A blue ballpoint pen, the kind that comes free at a feed store and writes badly for the first 3 seconds. A girl of 6 years old up on her knees on a kitchen chair, working with her tongue between her teeth, and an arm laid out flat on the table in front of her, her mother's arm, bare to the elbow, warm and completely still, because her mother had finally fallen asleep sitting up. The stove behind them was ticking as it went cold. The whole house smelled like bleach and old apples. The girl drew a man in a chair with wheels on it, and then, because she thought he needed one, she gave him a cape. 9 hours later, that mother stood out on a porch in the daylight with her sleeves pulled down over her wrists, and she said this out loud to a neighbor who did not believe one word of it. That man has not laughed since the night of the bridge. 4 years, not one time. And last night he laughed, because he came in and found me sleeping. I am going to tell you what that laugh cost her, and what it bought, because by the time the cold came back around, that one sound had changed where every single person in this story was going to sleep at night, including a 6-year-old girl who had spent every winter of her life getting dressed under a blanket. If you believe that life quietly puts the right person in the doorway of the wrong house, tap the like button for me before we start, and tell me where you are listening from tonight and whether it is warm where you are. I like to know who I am sitting with when I tell one like this. Hattie Klein had 2 rules for the job, and the man who hired her gave her both of them in the driveway without ever turning off his truck. The first was the hours. 11 at night until 5 in the morning, 6 nights a week. Cash on Fridays, no questions about the cash. The second rule was the green door at the end of the back hall. She was to clean up to it. She was never, under any circumstance, to open it or knock on it or raise her voice near it. "My uncle is not well," Del Reeve told her, with his elbow out the window. "He does not want to be seen, and he does not want to be spoken to. You are here so the house does not rot. You are not here for him." She had said yes before he finished, because it was the middle of January and the rent on the little place out on Little Marrow Road was $70 behind. She had a 6-year-old and a stove that would not hold heat past midnight. She was not in a position to ask what kind of a man hires a woman to clean a house at an hour when nobody could possibly see it get clean. The Reeve place sat at the top of the rise with 16 rooms and a lane of pear trees that nobody had pruned in 4 years. From the road, it still looked like money. Up close, you could see where the gutters had let go and where the greenhouse had lost 11 panes to hail, and nobody had swept the glass. Inside, most of the doorways had a bedsheet hanging over them. Hattie counted 7 rooms shut up that way her first night. Sheets pinned across the frames like somebody had covered the furniture and then given up and covered the rooms instead. She brought Pearl with her because there was nobody to leave her with, and because she would not have left her anyway. Pearl was 6, small for it, and she came in her nightgown with her boots on over bare feet. Hattie pushed 2 kitchen chairs together under the window and made a bed out of a folded quilt, and that is where the child slept from 11 until 5, while her mother worked the house room by room. Pearl never once complained about it. That was the part that got Hattie in the throat on the drive home when the girl was asleep against the door with her mouth open. A child who does not complain has already worked something out about her situation, and no mother wants to know what. The kitchen was the only room in that house with any life left in it. There was a black iron stove that still drew, a table with a burn ring the size of a saucer, and a window over the sink that looked down the whole valley. Hattie fell in love with that window the first week and was honest enough with herself to be embarrassed about it. She would stand there with her hands in the hot water, longer than the dishes needed, just to have the valley out in front of her for a minute. Their own house was 4 miles down, past where the gravel stops getting graded, and it had 3 rooms and a stove that was more decoration than stove. It would take a fire and hold it beautifully for about 2 hours and then let the whole thing go out through the back of it, into the wall, into the night. Hattie had learned to bank it a certain way and to put Pearl's clothes for the morning under the blanket with her so they would be warm when she got into them. That is the kind of thing you get good at, and there is no pride in getting good at it, and you get good at it anyway. And every night at some point she cooked, not for pay, nobody asked her to. She just could not stand a kitchen with a working stove and nothing coming off of it. So she would put up a pot of beans, or a pan of cornbread, or apples with cinnamon when the trees down the lane dropped enough to fill her coat pockets. She left it covered on the back of the stove, and she left a clean plate beside it. And every night when she came back the next evening, the plate was in the sink, used. She never said anything about that plate to anybody. It was the one thing in her whole life at the time that felt like a conversation. Then came a Tuesday in the first week of March, and she came down the back hall with her arms full of sheets, and she stopped so fast the top sheet slid off onto the floor. The green door was standing open. She stood there a long moment with her heart going in her ears, and then she did what any woman with a sleeping child 40 feet behind her would do. She said, "Hello?" Into the dark, quietly. And when nothing answered, she pulled the door to and went back to work, with her hands shaking so badly she had to set the bucket down twice. But the house had told her something, and she could not unhear it. Somebody moved around in there at night, somebody ate off that plate. And whoever it was had been in the back hall while she was 2 rooms away with her daughter asleep in the kitchen. Hattie asked about it the only place a person asks about anything on that road, which is standing in the gravel by a neighbor's truck. Ruby Teague had lived at the bottom of the rise for 31 years and knew every family in the valley by which of their dogs got out the most. She listened to the whole thing with her arms folded on the truck door and did not interrupt. "August Reeve," Ruby said finally. "That is who is behind your green door. And I will tell you something for nothing, honey. Nobody in this valley has laid eyes on that man in 4 years." She told it plain, the way people tell things they have told before. There had been a bridge out on the county line, and ice, and a night in February 4 years back. August Reeve had gone off it with his wife beside him in the car. He came back from the hospital in a chair he was not going to get out of, and Ellen Reeve did not come back at all. The funeral was at the house. Ruby had gone. She said he sat in the front room in that chair with his hands on his knees and thanked every single person who came through, one at a time, by name. And that was the last of him, Ruby said. The nephew moved in on it that summer, sold the horses, let the hands go, put Wendell Pike out after 22 years. Now he comes up twice a month in that truck and he does not stay an hour. She looked up the rise. "You know what nobody has heard out of that house since the funeral? A laugh, not one, not the radio, not company, nothing. There is a man alive up there, Hattie, and the whole valley talks about him like he is furniture." Hattie drove home that night with her jaw set. She kept thinking about the plate. A man who is furniture does not wash a plate and put it in the sink, so the woman who left it will know it got eaten. So she started leaving a little more. Not a note. She was not a fool, and she needed the job. Just a little more. 2 pieces of cornbread instead of 1. Her jar of the apples with the lid set on loose, so it would open easy in one hand. And on the Friday, when she came in at 11, there was a $5 bill folded under the clean plate, and under the bill, in pencil, on the back of a seed packet, 4 words in a hard old-fashioned hand. The apples were good. Hattie sat down on the kitchen floor with her back against the stove and cried for about 90 seconds with her hand over her mouth so it would not wake Pearl. She could not have told you why that night. She figured it out later. It was the first time in 2 years that anybody had told her that something she made was good. She put the seed packet in her coat pocket. She kept the $5 in there with it, and she did not spend it. And she started paying attention to that house the way you pay attention to a person. The greenhouse out past the kitchen garden with its broken panes and the glass still lying where the hail had put it. The rows out back gone to weed, where you could still see, if you looked from the kitchen window in the right light, that somebody had once laid that garden out in careful straight lines. A shelf in the mudroom with about 40 little tins on it, each one labelled in a woman's handwriting. Beans, squash, 3 kinds of tomato, and one in the middle marked Ellen's. Do not plant, save. And in the back hall, still in the box it came in, propped against the wall with the packing tape never cut, a set of steel grab bars, the kind you bolt beside a bathtub so a man can get himself in and out on his own. The delivery slip on the outside of that box was dated 3 years ago. Hattie stood and looked at it for a while, and something went through her that she did not have a name for yet, and did not like. 3 nights later, Pearl woke up. You have to understand about Pearl and the drawing, or the rest of this will not land the way it should. The child drew constantly on anything: paper bags, the insides of cereal boxes cut flat, the margins of the church bulletin, And she did not draw houses and suns like most children do. Pearl drew people, and she drew them doing something. Ruby Teague getting out of her truck with her arm up, Wendell Pike with his cap on backward, her mother asleep on the couch with one boot still on, which Hattie found taped to the icebox one morning and had to go stand in the yard about. Hattie had exactly one ambition in her life at that time, and it was not for herself. Pearl was going to finish school. Whatever it took, whatever hours it took, the girl was going to finish. Hattie had gotten as far as the 11th grade, and then her mother got sick, and that was that. And she had spent 19 years since then being told what she could not apply for. She was not going to hand that down. She had a coffee can on the top shelf at home with school money in it, and some weeks she put $1 in it, and some weeks she took 2 out, and she hated the weeks she took. Wendell Pike still came up the lane. That is the other thing you need to know. 22 years he had worked the Reeve place, and Del Reeve had let him go with 2 weeks' pay, and Wendell still drove up every second Saturday and cut that lane with his own mower and his own gas, and would not take $1 for it. Hattie caught him at it one morning at the end of her shift, and asked him why on earth he did that. He shut the mower off and thought about it honestly, which she liked him for. Ellen Reeve planted them pear trees the year I started, he said. I ain't cutting it for him, and I ain't cutting it for the nephew. I'm cutting it because I know what it's supposed to look like. He put his cap back on. A man ought to be able to look out a window and see one thing that ain't going to hell. That night Pearl woke up at 2 in the morning the way children do, all at once and completely, and asked for water. Hattie gave it to her and sat with her, and the girl looked around the big cold kitchen and asked the question she had been saving. Mama, who lives here? A man named Mr. Reeve. Where is he? He's in the back of the house, baby. He does not come out. Pearl thought about that with her chin on the rim of the cup. Is he sad? Hattie opened her mouth to say something comfortable, and then did not, because that girl could smell a comfortable answer from across a room. I think he might be, she said. I think something happened to him, and he does not know how to come out of the back of the house anymore. Pearl nodded slowly, like a person receiving a job. The next Friday, Del Reeve's truck came up the rise at 11:30 at night, which he had never once done, and the headlights swung across the kitchen wall. He came in through the mudroom without knocking, and stood there looking at the 2 chairs pushed together under the window, with a child asleep on them. There is a man coming Thursday to walk the property, he said. Appraiser. Do not be in the house when he is here, and do not be in the yard. He set her cash on the table, and then he put 2 fingers on it and slid it toward her without letting go for a second. And that kid does not come back here. I have got liability all over this place. He left. Hattie stood in the kitchen with her hands flat on the table and did not move for a full minute. Because she had 4 nights to figure out what to do with a 6-year-old at 11 o'clock at night, and because a man does not send an appraiser to walk a property he intends to keep, she did not tell Pearl. That was the decision she made, and I want to be fair to her about it. A woman with no options tells her child nothing and then carries the whole thing herself, and the carrying is what wears her down to the bone. By Wednesday, Hattie Klein had been awake for the better part of 40 hours. She had gone from the night shift straight to the diner out on the State Road, where they let her take breakfast shifts when a girl called out, because she was trying to get ahead of the rent before whatever was coming came. She stood at the sink that night, and her hands did not feel like they were entirely her own. Twice she went into a room and could not remember what she had brought the rag in there for. There is a particular kind of tired that people who have never done it do not know about, and I am going to describe it once and then leave it alone. It is not sleepy. Sleepy is pleasant. This is a low hum behind the eyes and a soreness in the jaw from holding it shut, and a feeling in the arms like they have been filled with wet sand up to the shoulder. You do not think about lying down. You think about sitting. All day long some back part of your mind is bargaining for 1 minute in a chair, and you keep telling it no, because you know what happens if you say yes. At 3 in the morning she came back to the kitchen to start the beans, and she got the pot on and she looked over at Pearl asleep on the 2 chairs, and she thought, I will sit down for 1 minute. That is all she thought. 1 minute. She sat in the kitchen chair by the table with her arms folded on the wood, and she meant to count to 60. She was asleep in under 20 seconds. It was the kind of sleep the body takes by force when it has stopped asking permission. Head down on her forearms, mouth open a little, one boot half off her heel. And at some point in there, Pearl woke up and found her mother finally still. The child got down off the chairs. She got the blue pen out of her mother's coat pocket, and she climbed up onto the chair beside her, and she went to work on the one clean, flat surface available to her, which was the inside of her mother's bare forearm. She had never actually seen the man. She had only ever seen the photograph in the front hall of a tall man standing at a fence, and she had heard her mother say he was in a chair now and could not walk. So she drew what she had, a man sitting in a chair with two big wheels. She drew the wheels first and got them nearly round. She gave him a straight line for a mouth because sad. Then she stopped and looked at it and decided that would not do at all. And she reached up and drew from his shoulders a cape, a big one, out behind him blowing. The wheels of a real chair make almost no sound on old boards. That is why neither of them heard him. He had come for the plate. That was all. 4 years of coming out at 3 in the morning like something that lives in a wall, to eat where nobody could see him do it, and go back before the sky changed. He came around the corner of the kitchen doorway and stopped, and there, in the light of the one bulb over the stove, he saw a woman face down asleep on his mother's table, sleeping the way soldiers sleep, and a 6-year-old girl in a nightgown, tongue between her teeth, drawing a cape on him. August Reeve made a sound he had not made in 4 years and 1 month. It came out of him wrong, cracked and too loud, more like a cough than anything, and then it turned over and became what it actually was. He laughed. He put the back of his hand up against his mouth to stop it, and it would not stop. His eyes ran and he did not wipe them. Hattie came up out of that table like the house was on fire. She had a rag in one hand and no idea where she was, and then she saw him. The man from the photograph, 4 years thinner, in the doorway of his own kitchen at 3 in the morning, laughing with his hand over his mouth and tears coming down, and she understood in one drop straight through her stomach exactly what this looked like. Asleep on the job. Her child on his chairs. Her child's pen on her own skin. Mr. Reeve, she was already pulling her sleeve down over the drawing, already reaching for Pearl. I am so sorry, it will not happen again. I will have her out of here in 1 minute. Don't. He got it out between breaths, and he had to stop and get his air. He was pointing at her arm. Don't wash it off. He did not say anything else that night. He got his breath back, and he wiped his face with the heel of his hand, and he looked at the child, who was regarding him with enormous calm, the way children look at a thing that adults have made complicated for no reason, and he said, "That is a very good cape." "You have to have one," Pearl said, "if you have got a chair." And then he turned around and went back down the hall, and the green door closed, and Hattie stood in that kitchen with her heart going like a bird in a box, holding her own arm, not knowing whether she had just been fired or something else. She did not sleep that day. She lay in her bed at home with the light coming through the curtain, and she kept turning her arm over on the pillow to look at it. A round-wheeled chair, a straight-line mouth, and a cape going out behind him like weather. Pearl had gone heavy on the cape. It was the biggest thing on the drawing. The next night the kitchen light was already on when she came in, and August Reeve was sitting at the table. He had shaved. That was the first thing she noticed, and it told her more than anything he said for the next 20 minutes, because a man who shaves at 11 o'clock at night has been thinking about being looked at. He had a pot of coffee on that he had made himself badly, and 2 cups out. He gestured at the chair across from him, and she sat down on about 4 inches of it with her coat still on. "I have been rude to you for 2 months," he said. "You have been feeding me for 2 months. I want to start there, and I want you to know I am aware of it." It was just what was on the stove. "No," he said, "it was not." He turned his cup a quarter turn on the table and did not look up. "My wife used to leave a plate on the back of that stove for whoever came in late. I want you to know that I knew exactly what you were doing, and I want to apologize for taking it for 2 months without one word, like an animal in a barn." Hattie's throat closed up so fast it took her by surprise, and she had to look hard at the window over the sink for a second. She had been called reliable. She had been called a hard worker. Nobody in 19 years had told her they knew what she was doing. Then he said what he had gotten up for. He wanted her days instead of her nights. 8 in the morning to 4 in the afternoon, 6 days, at more than double what his nephew was paying her, out of an account his nephew did not touch. Not to clean, he said. He had a phrase for it that she thought about for weeks afterward. He said, "I want somebody in this house who is awake at the same time I am." And here is where Hattie Klein earned every good thing that happened to her afterward, because she did not say yes. She sat there with her hands squeezed together in her lap, and she made herself say it. "Mr. Reeve, I have a 6-year-old girl and there is nobody to keep her. She would be here every day in this house, all day." Her voice went on her, and she pushed it back down and kept going. "And I will not take a job I am going to lose in 3 weeks when it turns out you cannot stand a child underfoot. So I need you to think about it honestly before you answer me, because I cannot afford to be told yes twice." August Reeve looked at her for a moment. "Mrs. Klein," he said, "there has not been a child in this house in 40 years. Do you have any idea how quiet 40 years is?" She drove home that night the long way, 4 miles of gravel with the window down and the cold coming in on her face, and about halfway she had to pull over onto the shoulder because she could not see the road. It was not the money, although the money meant her rent and her stove and the coffee can on the shelf. It was the thing he had said about the house being quiet for 40 years. She sat there on the shoulder of Little Marrow Road, with her forehead against the wheel and her hand over her mouth, crying about a man she had spoken to exactly twice, because she knew that quiet. She had been living in a version of it since Pearl's father went to Tulsa and stopped writing, and nobody had ever once thought to name it for her. Then she wiped her face on her sleeve and drove home and got her daughter into bed, and in the morning she told Pearl they were going to be working days now, and Pearl asked whether that meant the man with the chair, and Hattie said yes, it did. "Good," Pearl said, and that was the whole of the child's opinion on the matter. She started on the Monday, and 6 weeks later, on the 1st of May, Del Reeve's truck came up the rise. Before Del, though, I have to give you the first 3 days, because they were good days, and this story does not have so many of them that we can afford to skip any. And the appraiser did come on that Thursday, and walked the whole property with a clipboard, while Hattie kept Pearl down at Ruby Teague's and did not breathe right all day. August watched him from behind the curtain in the back hall, which is a thing he told her about much later, and could not talk about without his jaw going tight. The first thing Pearl did with that house was go through it like weather. 7 rooms with sheets over the doorways, and a 6-year-old took them down one at a time, folding each one badly and stacking it in the hall, and nobody stopped her because nobody had told her not to. Hattie came around a corner on the second morning and found her daughter standing in the middle of the front room, with her arms out and her head back, turning slowly in a square of sun that had not been let into that room since the funeral, and dust going up all around her like something in a church. "Mama," Pearl said without stopping, "it is bright in here." August was in the doorway behind them in his chair. Hattie turned around to apologize and saw his face and did not. The second thing was the shutters, which she did herself, working down the whole south side of the house with a screwdriver and a jar of oil, and when she got them open, the light came into rooms that had held nothing but their own smell for 4 years. The third thing waited until April, and it was the mudroom shelf. She carried the whole crate of little labeled tins into the kitchen and set it on the table in front of him without a word, because she had run out of ways to ask the question politely. He went still when he saw them. He put one hand on the crate the way you put a hand on a dog's head. "Ellen's," he said. "There is one in the middle you are not supposed to plant. Her mother's beans. Came out of Kentucky in 1941 in a coat pocket." He picked that tin up and turned it over and read the handwriting on the bottom of it, and Hattie watched a man read his wife's handwriting and had to go and be busy at the sink. She saved them every single year, best of the row, back in the tin, 26 years. His thumb went over the label. "There is nobody left who plants them." "Mr. Reeve," Hattie said to the window, "it is the 9th of April." He did not answer her. "I am only saying that it is the 9th of April," she said, "and that seed does not care whose house it is in. It cares what month it is." Behind her, she heard him set the tin down on the table. It took them the rest of that week to get one bed cleared, and I want to be honest about how that went, because it was not a montage. He could not kneel. He could not reach the ground from the chair without going out of it, and the ground out there was soft and the wheels went in. Twice she had to put her shoulder into the back of that chair to get him off the grass and back onto the path, and the second time he said, "This is humiliating," in a flat voice, and she said, "Yes, sir, it is," and kept pushing, because she had figured out by then that he could not stand being handled gently. So Wendell Pike built him a table. That is how Wendell came back. Hattie called him from the kitchen phone and asked if he knew how to make a planting bench a man could work from sitting down, and Wendell Pike said, "Give me till Saturday," and hung up without saying goodbye. And Ruby Teague told Hattie later that he had cried in his truck in her driveway before he drove up. By the end of the month, there were 4 raised beds along the south wall at the height of a man's hands in a chair, made of pear wood out of the lane, and August Reeves' fingernails were black, and he had planted 71 of his wife's beans in a straight line with a 6-year-old counting them out loud beside him. And there was one afternoon in there that had nothing to do with anything, and I'm going to tell it to you anyway, because it is the one I think about. It rained on the Wednesday, hard all day, so there was no garden. Pearl set herself up on the front room floor with her paper bags and her pen, and August sat by the window watching the water come down the glass, and neither of them said anything for the better part of an hour. Then the girl got up and brought him something and put it in his lap and went straight back to the floor, without waiting to see his face, the way children do when a thing matters to them. It was the drawing again, done properly this time, on the flat of a grocery bag. The chair, the round wheels, the cape going out behind him. But she had changed one thing. This time the mouth was not a straight line, and there was a second figure standing beside the chair, small, with a triangle for a dress. "Who is this one here?" he asked. "That is me," Pearl said, colouring. "I am holding on." August Reeves sat with that paper bag on his knees and put his hand flat over the bottom of his own face and held it there. He did not make a sound. Hattie was in the doorway with a dish towel, and she did not go in, and she did not say anything, and the rain kept coming down the window. After a while he took his hand away and asked the girl in a completely normal voice whether capes were something she could do in another colour, and Pearl said yes, but she only had blue, and he said that was a real shame, and he would see what he could do about it. He had that grocery bag under the blanket on his lap for the rest of the day. Hattie saw it there twice and pretended she did not. On the 1st of May, Dell's truck came up the rise, and it did not go back down for 3 hours. Dell Reeves stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at the open shutters and the folded sheets stacked in the hall, and Hattie watched his face do a thing she recognized from other men in other kitchens. He was not surprised. He was calculating. "Uncle," he said, "the shutters are open all down that side, and there is a child in the yard." "There is," August said. "You are paying her out of the house account." "I am." Dell turned to Hattie with a smile that had nothing behind it whatsoever. "Mrs. Klein, could you give us the room?" "She can stay," August said. And Dell said, "No, she cannot." And something in the way he said it, the sheer ownership in it, in another man's kitchen, about another man's employee, made Hattie set down the pan she was holding. But August put 2 fingers up off the arm of his chair, 1/2 an inch, at her. Not yet. So she took Pearl out to the garden and stood with her hands on the girl's shoulders, looking at 71 bean sprouts, and she could hear the shape of it through the window without hearing the words. Here is what she learned over the following 2 weeks, not from any paperwork, but the way things are actually learned in a valley, from people who were there. Wendell Pike, over the fence, with his cap in his hands. He had been let go in the July after the accident, and he had gone up to the house 6 times that first year to see about the pear trees, and been turned back in the driveway every time. He had never once been told that August had asked for him, not once. Ruby Teague in her kitchen, pouring. A truck had come up that rise the spring after the funeral, a proper outfit with a ramp on the bed of it, and she had watched it come back down 40 minutes later with the ramp still on it. She had assumed all these years that the man himself had refused it. And August on his own on a Tuesday, out of nowhere, looking at the garden. "I asked for a chair with a motor in it, 19 months ago. He told me the money was not there." He said it evenly. The money was there. That was the whole shape of it, and it was uglier than money. A man in a chair who cannot get up the hall on his own, who cannot get into his own bathtub, who has no telephone put where he can reach it, and no ramp and no help. That man does not sell his house. That man agrees to whatever is put in front of him, eventually because he is tired. Del Reeve had not stolen anything from his uncle. He had simply left him exactly as helpless as he needed him to be, and drawn a caretaker's wage for it, and waited. Hattie went and got the box out of the back hall, the steel grab bars 3 years old, packing tape, never cut. Do you know what these are? I know what they are. They have been 40 feet from you for 3 years. August Reeve looked at that box for a long moment, and then he said, "Get me a screwdriver." It took them 2 days. She held. He drove the screws from the chair at an angle no man was meant to work at, with his arms shaking by the end of it. And on the Thursday morning he got himself into that bathtub alone, and out of it alone, and Hattie stood in the hall on the other side of a closed door, listening to a grown man breathe and not go in there, which was the hardest thing she did that whole spring. He came out with his hair wet and his shirt buttoned wrong. 4 years, he said, and had to stop. He was holding on to the frame of the door with one hand. 4 years I have been washed by a woman who is paid by the hour. Do you understand what that does to a man? Yes, sir. No, he said. You do not. Then he looked at her, really looked, at the double shift in her face, at the boots she had, at the arm she had scrubbed a drawing off of and been sorry about ever since. I take that back, he said quietly. I expect you do. That afternoon he asked her to drive him to town. He had not been to town in 4 years. It took them 50 minutes to get him into that car and 11 minutes to drive it. He would not let her park behind the hardware store where it was quiet. He made her park on the square, out front, at 2 in the afternoon on a Thursday, and he sat in the passenger seat with both hands on his knees for a good while before he said, "All right." And then the whole valley got to watch August Reeve come back from the dead in front of the bank. Ruby Teague's sister first, and then the man from the feed store, and then a woman who had been at Ellen's funeral and put her hand on the window glass and could not say anything at all. He was grey in the face by the time they got back in the car. Hattie shut his door and went around and got in and did not start the engine for a minute, and he said to the windshield, "Thank you for not helping me back there. You did not need helping. I needed it very badly," he said. "Thank you for not doing it." And that is the trip on which Del Reeve found out that his uncle had opened a second account in his own name, with his own signature. And that Friday night, Del was waiting in the dark in the kitchen when Hattie came in, with an envelope on the table in front of him. "Sit down, Mrs. Klein." She stayed standing with her coat on and her keys still in her hand, which she would tell you afterward was the only smart thing she did that night. $2,000, Del said, and put one finger on the envelope. "That is more than you will make up here in 5 months. You take that tonight and you do not come back Monday, and I will write you a reference that will get you on anywhere in this county. And if I do come back Monday, then on Monday I file to have my uncle declared unable to manage his own affairs." He let that sit. "And when the county asks me how I came to that conclusion, I'm going to tell them about a widower with no medical training, who moved a woman he does not know into his house within a month of meeting her, put her on his account, and let her 6-year-old run loose in a property with a 100-year-old staircase and a greenhouse full of broken glass." He turned his hands over. "I will not have to prove he is not right in the head. I will only have to make somebody wonder. And do you know what happens to you in that room when they start wondering? They are not going to wonder about me, Mrs. Klein. They are going to wonder about the cleaning woman." The stove ticked. Out the window, the valley was black all the way down to Ruby Teague's porch light. "You are not a bad woman," Del said more quietly, and this was the part that was almost kind, and that was the part that frightened her. "You have got a kid, and no cushion. I am not asking you to do anything wrong. I'm asking you to take a good offer and go home." Hattie thought about the coffee can on the top shelf with the school money in it. She thought about $70 behind, and about the stove that lets the heat out through the back into the wall, and about a 6-year-old getting dressed under a blanket. $2,000 was every argument she had lost since she was 19 years old, sitting in an envelope on a table. And I will tell you the truth about that minute, because Hattie told it on herself years later and did not spare herself one bit of it. She wanted to take it. Not in a small way, not in a way she had to fight off. She wanted it the way you want to sit down. There was a whole life in that envelope. $2,000 was a stove that held its heat. It was the 70 behind and the next 4 months in front. It was the coffee can filled up to the lid and a winter where nobody got dressed under a blanket. She was 38 years old, and she had never in her life been handed anything. And here was a man handing her something, and all she had to do was be tired, which she already was. What stopped her was not principle. She would want me to be clear about that. What stopped her was that she could see it. The Monday. Pearl at the window at 8 in the morning asking why they were not going. That house with the shutters closing back up one at a time. 71 bean plants in a row nobody would water past July. A green door at the end of a back hall, shut, with a man behind it who had shaved for her. And she thought about a man holding onto a door frame with his hair wet, saying 4 years. She picked up the envelope. She put it in her coat pocket, and she said, "Good night, Mr. Reeve." And she walked out of that kitchen and got in her car and drove down the rise with her hands shaking on the wheel. I need you to sit with that for a second, because I did, the first time I heard this story told. She took it. There is no way around it, and I am not going to soften it for you. She took the money. What I did not know then, and what Del Reeve did not know either, standing in that kitchen watching her tail lights go down the hill, well pleased with himself, was where Hattie Klein was driving to at 11 o'clock at night with $2,000 in her coat. She did not go home. She drove to Ruby Teague's, and she leaned on that doorbell until the porch light came on, and Ruby came to the door in a housecoat and took one look at her face and said, "Get in here." Hattie put the envelope on Ruby's kitchen table and did not touch it again. She told the whole thing straight through, the 2,000, the Monday, the county, the sentence about how nobody would wonder about him, they would wonder about the cleaning woman. And when she was done, she said the thing she had driven 4 miles to say out loud to another human being, because she did not trust herself to be the only one who had heard it. "Ruby, if I hand that back to him with nobody in the room, it is my word against his forever." Ruby Teague went and got the telephone off the wall on its long cord and dialed Wendell Pike at 20 past 11 at night and said 9 words into it. "Wendell, get your truck. We are going up there." 3 vehicles came up that rise at midnight. Hattie first, then Ruby, then Wendell Pike in a truck you could hear from the bottom of the hill. Dell's car was still in the drive. Every light in the kitchen was on. They came in through the mudroom, the 3 of them, and Del Reeve stood up out of his chair so fast it went over backwards. August was at the table in his robe. He had been sitting there in the dark since she left, and I want you to know what he had been sitting there thinking, because he told her later. He had been thinking that she had taken it, and that he did not blame her one bit, and that he was going to have to be very careful in the morning not to let it show on his face. Hattie put the envelope down on the table in front of him, unopened, with the flap still tucked. "He offered me $2,000 to not come back Monday," she said. "And to make it look like you were not right in the head for hiring me. I want 3 people in this room to have heard me say, 'I am not taking it.'" And then Hattie Klein sat down, hard, in the nearest chair, because her legs had quit on her. What happened next did not happen fast. Del talked for a while. He was good at it. That was the frightening part. He explained about liability, and about how a man in his uncle's position gets taken advantage of, and how none of this was personal, and Wendell Pike stood by the door with his cap in his 2 hands and let him get all the way to the end of it. Then August Reeve said, "Del." And that was the moment right there, for my money. Not the envelope, not the neighbors, just an old man saying his nephew's name in his own kitchen, in a voice that had a flaw under it. "You turned Wendell Pike out of my driveway 6 times, August said. "You sent a ramp truck back down my hill. You told me 19 months ago that the money was not there for a motor on this chair, and the money was there, and you knew it was there. And I sat in the back of this house for 19 months believing you." He was not shouting. His hands were shaking on the arms of the chair, and his voice was not. "I have not been unable to manage my affairs, son. I have been alone. There is a difference, and you have been living off of it. Dell said, You are going to regret bringing these people into a family matter. They are not people, August said. That is Wendell, that is Ruby. They were at my wife's funeral. You came late and left early. Del Reeve picked up his keys off the table. At the door he turned around and looked straight at Hattie and he said, You had better hope he lives a long time. The truck went down the rise. Nobody in that kitchen said anything for a minute. And then Ruby Teague, God bless her, went to the stove and put the kettle on in another woman's kitchen at midnight. And that broke it. And Wendell sat down. And August Reeve put both hands over his face and kept them there for a long moment while three people politely looked at the table. He came out of it with his eyes red and asked Hattie a question she did not have any answer ready for. How much of that garden could you sell? Now I have to take you into August, into the heat, and into the worst night of that year, because that is where this story decided what it was going to be. The beans came in. 71 plants had turned into more than the two of them could eat by the middle of July, and there were 4 more beds by then, and the greenhouse had its panes back in it. Wendell did the glass, 1 pane at a time on Saturdays, and would still not take money. So August put him back on the books at his old wage plus 4 years of raises he had never gotten, and mailed it to his house, and Wendell cashed it because his wife made him. Hattie's part was the kitchen. She was doing what she had done free at 3 in the morning for 2 months, except now it was jars, beans, tomatoes, the apples with cinnamon, and a hot relish out of Ellen Reeve's own handwriting on the back of a tin. Ruby Teague took the first case to the feed store on a Tuesday on the way to her sister's, and came back with an empty case and $11 and stood in the kitchen holding those $11 like a fish she had caught. They want more, Ruby said. Hattie, they asked me when the next lot was coming. By September, Ruby Teague was driving a route, 3 towns every Tuesday and Friday in that truck. She was 66 years old, and she had spent 31 years at the bottom of that rise watching other people's business go up and down the road, and now she had a route, and she had a clipboard on the seat beside her that she did not need but liked. There was an evening in there I want to put in front of you. Hattie was at the table with a shoebox of labels she was drawing by hand, 1 at a time, because they could not pay a printer yet. August rolled up and watched her do about 4 of them, and then he said, You are putting my name on those. It is your house and your mother-in-law's beans. Ellen's mother's beans, he said, and Ellen would have gone through the ceiling. He tapped the table twice. Put your own name on it, Mrs. Klein. Nobody ever put mine on anything I made. It was on the sign before I was born, and I have spent my whole life wondering whether I would have been worth anything if it had not been. So the label says Klein. In her handwriting, because she drew the first 200 herself, and by the time they could afford a printer, nobody wanted to change it. And then the second week of October, Pearl got sick. It came on the way it does with children. Nothing at supper. And by 11 at night, the girl was burning up and crying in a thin way that does not sound like her. And their own house was already cold, because the stove had let go through the back of it into the wall the way it always did. Hattie sat on the edge of that bed with a wet cloth, and her hand on her daughter's chest counting, in a room she could see her own breath in. She got Pearl into the car in a blanket at midnight, and she drove up the rise because it was the only place she could think of where it was warm. August Reeve came down that hall in his chair with his robe on inside out. He took one look and said, The front bedroom. It has got the chimney behind it. And then he did something that Hattie did not fully understand until years afterward. He did not take the child from her. He did not tell her what to do. He went and built the fire himself from the chair on the hearth with his shaking hands, and he got it going. And then he stayed out of that room and let a mother put her own daughter to bed. The fever broke at 4 in the morning. Hattie came out into the hall and found him sitting in the dark outside the door where he had been the whole time. She is cool, Hattie said. She is asleep. Good. And Hattie Klein, 38 years old, who had not asked one soul for one thing since she was 19, stood in that hallway and started to come apart in a way she could not stop, not loud, with her fist against her mouth and her shoulders going, the ugly, quiet kind. He did not say anything for a while. He just rolled up beside her and put his hand on her arm and held on and let her have it out. I am so tired. she said. "I am so tired, Mr. Reeve. I know it. That house does not get warm. It has never once been warm. 4 years I have been putting her clothes under the blanket." "I know it," he said again. And then after a while, "There are 16 rooms in this house, and I have been using 2 of them." He offered them the east side, the whole wing, with its own door and its own stove, for nothing, and Hattie said no. She said no for 11 days, and I hope you understand exactly why, and I hope nobody in your life has ever had to explain it to you. She had been given things before with a bill attached, so they went round and round about it until August Reeve, who was learning, finally got it right. He stopped offering. He wrote up a rent, a real one, low but real, and he took it out of her pay on the 1st, and he handed her a receipt for it every single month like a man with a lodger. They moved in on the last Saturday in October. Pearl got the corner room with 2 windows. It had a chimney behind the wall and it was warm at 4 in the morning, and it stayed warm, and that girl did not get dressed under a blanket again for the rest of her childhood. 6 days later, Del Reeve came back up the rise with 2 men in the car. They came at 10 in the morning on a Friday, which was, as luck and Ruby Teague's route would have it, the single worst possible morning for a man to arrive and try to prove that August Reeve's house was in the hands of a stranger. Because on a Friday morning that kitchen was full. Ruby was loading her truck at the mudroom door. Wendell Pike was up a ladder on the greenhouse. There were 14 cases of jars stacked on the porch with the labels Hattie had drawn out by hand, and a girl of 6 sitting on the top step with a paper bag on her knees, colouring. Del got out with an appraiser and a man he introduced carefully as somebody who worked with the county on capacity matters. He had it all built. Hattie could see the shape of it. He had come to find exactly what he had described that night at the table: a confused old man, a house being run by a woman nobody knew, a child in a hazard. August Reeve came out the front door of his own house and down the ramp that Wendell Pike had built him in September, in a chair with a motor on it that he had gone to town and bought himself, dressed, shaved, with dirt under his fingernails from the beds. "Gentlemen," he said, "you have come to see whether I know what is going on in my own house." He did not argue with them. He took them out to the garden, which is the only place he ever wanted to take anybody that whole year. He showed them the 4 raised beds at the height of a man's hands and told them what was in each one, and who had built them and what he had paid the man who built them. He showed them the greenhouse with its new glass, pane by pane, and said who had put it in and on which Saturdays. He put his hand on a bean plant and told them the name of the woman who had carried that seed out of Kentucky in a coat pocket in 1941, and how many falls she had saved it back, and what month it goes in the ground. Then he stopped in the middle of his own garden and turned to the man from the county. "You have been brought up here to wonder about me," he said, "so let me help you along. Mr. Reeve, I do not think... 4 years ago I came home from a hospital without my wife, and I let this house shut down around me. That was mine. I do not lay it on anybody." He was not shouting. His hands were steady on the arms of that chair for the first time in the whole story. But I was not confused and I was not incapable. I was alone at the end of a back hall. And the nephew who drew a wage to look in on me made good and sure I stayed there, because a man alone at the end of a hall gets tired, and a tired man agrees to anything. Nobody spoke. "Ask him about the ramp truck that came up this hill and went back down it full," August said. "Ask Wendell Pike up that ladder how many times he was turned around in my driveway without my ever being told he had come. Then come back and wonder about me all you want to." Nobody said anything. Ruby Teague at the mudroom door had a case of jars in her arms and did not move a muscle. And then Pearl on the top step, holding up the grocery bag she had been working on, said to the whole yard in the enormous voice of a child who has finished something, "Mr. August, I did it in red." August Reeve turned around and looked at that cape, and he laughed. It came out of him big and rusty and completely unembarrassed, right there in front of the appraiser and the county man and his nephew, in the driveway of the house where nobody had heard him laugh in 4 years. And Wendell Pike started up on the ladder, and Ruby put the case down on the tailgate because she had to. The county man was not unkind about it. He said, "Mr. Reeve, I do not believe I have got any business here." And he shook August's hand, and he walked back to the car past a stack of 14 cases with a woman's name on the labels. Dell stood in that driveway for a moment, with everything gone out from under him. Nobody shouted at him, nobody ran him off. That is the part I want you to hear, because I think it is the truest thing in this whole story. Not one person in that yard said a word to him. Hattie Klein, who had every right on this earth to say something, looked at him and then looked away and went to help Ruby with the cases, and that was the worst thing that could have happened to him, and she did not even do it on purpose. He got in the car. The car went down the rise, and out of all of them, the only one who ever spoke to him again was August, twice a year on the telephone, because he was Ellen's sister's boy, and August had promised her once that he would keep an eye on him. That night, when the yard was empty and the jars were gone, and Pearl was asleep with the red pen still in the bed, August Reeve asked Hattie Klein a question out on the porch. She made him say it 3 times. She made him say it 3 times because the first 2 times she was certain she had heard it wrong, and because a woman who has been handed one envelope in her life does not trust the 3rd sentence out of anybody's mouth. What he asked her on that porch was whether she would take the kitchen. Not work in it, take it. Her name on the door of it and her name on the account it fed, and rent paid to him for the room, so that if he died in his sleep that winter, there would be no man on this earth who could come up that hill and put her out of it. He had been to town about it twice without telling her. Hattie Klein said, "Say that again," and then she said, "Say it one more time." And on the 3rd time she sat down on the top step next to a red pen and cried with her hands flat on her knees, in front of him, without covering her face, which she had not done in front of another adult since she was 19 years old. A year on, and I will show you the place the way it was on an ordinary Tuesday, because that is the only honest way to end a story like this one. The kitchen has got a 2nd stove in it now, a big one, put in against the north wall where the shelf of tins used to be. There are 3 women working in there on a Tuesday, and one of them is the girl who used to hand Ruby her cases at the feed store, and Hattie Klein is the one who tells them what is going in the jars. It is not an empire. Nobody got rich. What it is 14 towns, a name on a label, and a woman who signs for her own deliveries and does not check the price of a stove before she says the number out loud. She still cleans the house herself on Sunday, and August has told her 900 times to stop, and she has said 900 times that it is her house too, and he does not get to say. She reads at night now, since her hours stopped being a double shift. She got her diploma in the spring, at the community hall in a folding chair, 39 years old, and Pearl made a sign for it in red pen. Wendell Pike has his workshop back, the old one behind the barn with the good south light, and he does the crates for the jars and about 40 other things nobody asked him to do. He put a hand-cut sign over the workshop door that says E. Reeve Orchard, EST, 1961, because he knows what it is supposed to look like. Ruby Teague drives 4 routes now and has a girl helping her, and she is 67, and if you ask her what she does, she will tell you she is in the shipping end of it. She said to Hattie once on the porch with her clipboard against her chest, 31 years I watched this road. I did not know you could get on it. Pearl is 7.5 and she is in school, and there is a coffee can on the top shelf that has not had anything taken out of it in 14 months. And on the wall of the front room, in a real frame with glass on it, there is a drawing on a piece of grocery bag. A man in a chair with 2 round wheels, a red cape going out behind him like weather, and a small figure standing next to him with a triangle for a dress holding on. August Reeve is out in the garden most mornings at the height of a man's hands in a chair, and he laughs a good deal now, and I am told he is loud about it and does not care who hears. There is one more thing, and then I am done with the facts of it. On the 9th of April this year, Hattie found him out at the beds in the early part of the morning, not working, just sitting with a tin in his hands. The one from the middle of the crate, the one marked, "Do not plant. Save." He had been out there a while. She came and stood beside him and did not say anything because she had learned that much. 26 years she kept these back, he said. Best of the row, every fall, into the tin. For a year she was not going to see. He turned it over. I have been sitting here trying to work out whether she saved them because she was thrifty or because she believed there was going to be somebody. Hattie said, "There was somebody." He opened the tin, and the 2 of them planted her mother's beans out of Kentucky in a straight line at the height of a man's hands, with a 7-year-old counting them out loud, and every one of them came up. Let me leave you with 3 things out of this, and then I will let you go. A pan left covered on the back of a stove with a clean plate set beside it for 2 months by a woman who never once asked who was eating it. A box of steel bars sitting 40 feet from a man who needed them, with the tape never cut. And a 6-year-old girl up on her knees on a kitchen chair at 3 in the morning, deciding that a man in a wheeled chair could not go around without a cape. Here is the only thing I know for certain after telling it. People do not usually break down because life is hard. They break down because nobody has looked at them in a long time. And I hope somebody looks at you this week. Not when you are put together and not when you have got the answer ready. I mean on the day you are worn all the way down, sitting down for 1 minute in a kitchen chair. I hope somebody comes around the corner and is glad you are there. Now, one thing before you go. I want to know about your cape. Somebody once saw you at your absolute most tired and did not see a tired woman. They saw something better than that, and they told you so, and you never forgot it. Who was that, and what did they say to you? Leave it for me down below because I would truly like to know. And there is probably a name that came to you while I was telling this. Somebody who is doing the 3 in the morning right now with nobody watching. Send it to her. You do not have to explain why. She will understand it before the end.